Good morning, folks. This is Billy Trout with the Tennessee Department of Revenue's Taxpayer Education section. And on behalf of our Commissioner, David Giaricano, and our folks in the Taxpayer Services Division, including our Director, Elena Turner, I'd like to welcome you to today's presentation about Tennessee's agricultural sales tax exemption. So with me today, I have our hostess with all the information, so to speak, Miss Katie Julian, and she's going to walk you through our presentation. And we have a special guest star today, Miss Martha Potter, who is the supervisor of the unit that processes these application forms. And she's going to give you a few tips that you might need to know about preparing to submit your application in the proper manner. So we're glad to have y'all with us today. We have quite a few people that are joining us today. Still others popping in here, so they'll be joining as well. Katie, you'll go through some of the details here with you in just a second, but just understand that we do have copies of this material on our website now that you can actually have in PDF form and follow along if you'd like. And of course, the recording will be posted tomorrow once we get everything popped up there too. So Katie, I'll turn it over to you, and if you will, to also discuss about CPE credit, if you would. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Billy, and thanks to Dan for being here, and Martha, especially to you. We're really excited to have you as a special subject matter expert on this topic today. So we are just to talk about a few things you see in front of you and to reiterate what Billy mentioned. Um, let's see. The PDF of this presentation is on our website. We put a link over in the chat. The chat right now is disabled for participants just during this presentation part, but we will open it up when it's Q&A time. So if you've got any questions, just hold on to those, and here in about 20 minutes or so when we're done with this official part of the presentation and open things up for discussion, you can put your questions in the chat. Let's see here. So as Billy mentioned, today we are going to be going over agricultural exemptions. There's been some big changes surrounding this topic recently that just went into effect just a few weeks ago on January 1st. So we're looking forward to presenting these to you and hopefully taking some of the guesswork out. Actually, the new laws that passed with regards to sales tax exemptions for the agricultural industry, in my opinion, really simplified things a lot. So hopefully you'll think so too after hearing about this information. Real quick before I get started, Billy did want me to mention to you, and I'll reiterate again at the end, if you are a CPA or an accountant that is wanting CPE, professional education credit for this, we are now offering that. So if you registered for this and indicated that you wanted CPE credit, that's great. We'll send those out within the next few days. This is a new thing for us, so just let us know if you have any questions about that. There's also information about it on our taxpayer education webinars site that same link as I've put in the chat for the recording and the PDF and all that, same place. You can get more information about CPE credits. So now I'll get things started with the agricultural exemptions. As we mentioned, we're going to be focusing today on the sales tax exemption, because that is where we've had big changes recently. Regarding sales tax, farmers, timber harvesters, and nursery operators can qualify to make certain purchases exempt from sales tax. And really what you'll learn here soon is that it's most purchases. If you qualify, then you can make purchases of most items that are used in your industry for without having to pay sales tax. Now for F&E, agricultural sales tax, agricultural exemptions, certain limited liability companies, limited partnerships, corporations engaged in farming are exempt from F&E tax if they are an obligated member entity or family-owned non-corporate entity. There's more information about that. If you don't already know about our webinar video archive, there's a link here. You can't click on it from this WebEx webinar, but if you've downloaded the materials, or if you download the materials later that I mentioned, the PDF that's on our website, you can click those links there. We have specific webinars dedicated to information about OME and the fonts credit for the F&E tax, that if you're on here interested in agricultural exemptions, you might find that helpful as well. For business tax does apply to gross sales, and that does include people selling farm, nursery, and related products. However, there is an exemption with business tax for the sale of livestock, horses, poultry, nursery stock, and other farm products that are sold directly from the farm. There's more information about that in our business tax manual beginning on page 117. There's a hyperlink there. If you've got the PDF, you can follow that over later. And I'm also going to be showing y'all another great resource that is a whole tax manual we have that's dedicated just to the agricultural industry. Um, so very helpful there. All right, so moving on to what we're talking about today, the sales tax exemptions for agriculture. There is recent legislation. Last year's General Assembly in Tennessee did pass this bill that basically expanded the sales tax exemption for agricultural products. It went into effect on 1/1 of 23, just a few weeks ago. Beginning on that date, qualifying farmers, timber harvesters, and nursery operators uh, may purchase most items of TPP, tangible personal property, that's used primarily in agricultural operations exempt from sales tax. Primarily meaning more than 50% of the time these products are going to be needed to be used in agricultural operations. We'll define that a little more later. For details about this, you can look at Notice 2214 on our website. Today, we are going to be going over how to qualify and how to apply for this exemption, what products may and may not be purchased using the certificate. Again, this new law expands it. Lots more that you can purchase being exempt from sales tax if you meet the qualifications and criteria. We're going to be talking about renewing this certificate, especially how it relates to this new law. And we're going to go over some FAQs. Again, like I mentioned, hold your questions for now, and when we are done with this presentation part, we are going to have a discussion with Martha and Billy, so you can put your questions in the chat there to this panel. I mentioned the agricultural manual. You can see here there is a link, if you've got the PDF, links right over to our Tennessee Tax Manual for Farmers, Nursery Operators, and Timber Harvesters. It does include this most recent information about the new law, so great resource there. If you're in this webinar, you are probably interested in this topic. This manual will give you every piece of information just about that you could need about the topic. It'll expand on things that I'm going to just touch on here today. Okay, so you can zoom in if you want to look at our application here. You can zoom from your screen on the webinar here, but this is what the application looks like. We have moved into this century with most things and most functions that you need to do with the Tennessee Department of Revenue you can do on TNTAP and on our website, but this is still a paper application process for the ag exemption. That has not been updated. You cannot apply for this through your TNTAP account. Now you can send us your completed application via email to revenue.support@tn.gov, but the paper application is still the only way to go for this process. I do want to say that if you currently have an ag card, if you currently have an ag exemption, you do not need to reapply due to these recent law changes. We're just going to go through the process of applying for those that are on here or that may be watching this video later that want guidance and need information about how to apply and what kind of criteria is necessary. But so just to repeat, if you have a current ag exemption, no need to do anything. We're just going to let you know about how the expansion applies to you. All right, now we're going to talk about, just to go back one here, the middle section here at the top of the application is your basic information about your entity. In the middle here, I'm going to zoom in on my own. It won't zoom it for y'all, but in the middle is the criteria. You're supposed to check at least one criteria and then also submit proper documentation. This is basically how you qualify for this exemption. We're going to break those down line item by line item. The first way you can qualify for the exemption is to be an owner or lessee of agricultural land from which $1,500 or more of agricultural products were produced and sold during the last year, including payments from government sources. All right, so If that is what applies to you and how you would qualify for the ag exemption, the required documentation that you're going to need is any proof of payments that can prove that. Receipts, bills of sale. Important to note here that the applicant's name has to be listed there. Copies of tax returns reflecting income information. So your federal return that might signify that this is how you qualify. Those are pieces of required documentation. And I think Martha will probably touch on this later, and we can't emphasize enough how sending in the required documentation is key. I think most of these applications, the reason that they get sent back and we're not able to process them when they originally come in is usually because of insufficient documentation. Sometimes you've missed an item. When we say, excuse me, when we say this application must be completed in its entirety, that means really don't skip a section. Make sure you sign it at the end, but really providing the requisite documentation is key. So hopefully this presentation will take some of that guesswork out for you. The second criteria that we have for qualifying for the ag exemption, if you provide for hire custom agricultural services of plowing, planting, harvesting, growing, raising, or processing of agricultural products, or for the maintenance of agricultural land, you will qualify for this exemption. Required documentation for this meeting this criteria is copies of your Form 1099 from last year's filing. One thing I'll say about that right now, when it comes to providing documentation, federal forms that you can use to qualify for the exemption, it needs to be last year's documentation, but we'll need, that's only for once May comes around, we'll need, like right now, we'll still accept 2021 federal documentation to support your application. But beginning in about May of this year, it'll have to be your 2022 federal return information that you supply. And just let you know, none of this is new. All of this has not changed at all with this recent law. Nothing about qualifying or the proof of qualification, the documentation required has changed. All right, the next one is for qualifying for the ag exemption, the owner of land qualifies for taxation under the provisions of the Agricultural, Forest, and Open Space Land Act of 1976. Required documentation for that is going to be copy of the qualification of the land under the Agricultural, Forest, and Open Space Land Act.
That's known as the Greenbelt Law, if anybody needs to know what the general terminology is.
Thank you, Billy. Much easier to say, too. The Greenbelt Law. You qualify for the Greenbelt Law, you qualify for an ag exemption. The next item is if you have federal income tax return that contains one or more of the following. Business activity on the IRS Schedule F, required documentation there is the Schedule F, or farm rental activity on IRS Form 4835. For documentation for that, you can provide one of three things, either the Form 4835, your Schedule F, or Schedule E. And again, if you are applying right now, your 2021 documentation would suffice, but here in a few months, just after the tax deadline to file for this year, you'd need to start supplying documentation that's from your 2022 federal return. All right, the next item of qualification for the ag exemption is otherwise establish active engagement in the business of raising, harvesting, or otherwise producing agricultural commodities. We'll define agricultural commodities here in a minute, but required documentation. Now, this is not an or list. This is an and list. You have to provide all of these items here. And Martha let us know when we were putting this presentation together that I think this is particularly one of the criteria where something gets missed. It's not uncommon for something to get missed. So definitely where you want to dot all your I's and cross all your T's with providing this documentation, if this is the area where you qualify for exemption or where you're wanting to apply for qualification. Required documentation, the date the land was acquired, that kind of goes without needing explanation. Number of acres under cultivation and or breed and number of livestock being raised. The next two, projected date of first sale and projected income from agricultural product. Don't read too much into this. Projected just means projected. We understand you may, if you are just getting into this business, you don't know yet exactly when your first sale is going to be, right? You don't know yet what your income is going to be. We're just looking for projections there. Do your best job, do your best to project that. We understand that there are extenuating factors that you can't predict, just looking for projections. Real important here also, a marketing plan. You have to provide that as well when trying to qualify under this criteria, how you will sell your agricultural product. Just a few more small items of information about the exemption certificate. As I mentioned, it's a paper form. If you want a faster response from us, you send that via email to us to revenue.support@tn.gov. Of course, you can mail it to our address. The address is on the application if you want to go that route. At any rate, however you want to do it, whether you snail mail it in or email it in, that's the only option right now, is to fill out the paper application. And once you qualify, if you don't qualify, you'll hear from us. We'll let you know what you're missing, if you're missing anything or what you need to do. We work with you there. If you did qualify, you're going to get the actual certificate, and that will serve as your notice of exempt status. Okay, now we're going to talk about renewing. As I mentioned, if you already hold an ag exemption, based on this new law that expands what you can buy using it, you do not need to do a renewal, but this just happens to be a renewal year. This exemption certificate expires every 4 years, regardless of when you got it. It's not 4 years from when you received your exemption. It's just on a 4-year basis. So everybody's ag exemption is going to be coming up December 31st of this year. That's when it's going to renew. If nothing has changed, you will just get a renewal from us. You'll get your new certificate. It'll be mailed out usually around late November, early December. We will be mailing it to the mailing address that is on file with the Tennessee Department of Revenue. Don't reach out to us before 12/31 of 2023 of this December 31st, because we cannot send them out early with requests. We'll send them out to you to your mailing address, but we can't take requests for additional, for sending it out again or anything like that until after January 1st. So very important that you update your mailing address with us. Sometimes that goes, I mean, if you do have a mailing address change, as you know, it's kind of a process. You got to change it everywhere, right? Don't forget to change it with us, because we will be mailing your ag exemption certificate to the mailing address that we have on file. You can update your mailing address in TNTAP. Important to note there. That's something that you can update in TNTAP, or you can email it to us at revenue.support@tn.gov. As long as we have something in writing, we can update your address for you. But this is really important what we have here, the next item under that second bullet. If we receive return mail, so if you have not updated your address with us and we have received something returned that we've tried to send you, not just necessarily your certificate, but any item of mail, we put a stop mail indicator on your account in our system. And at that point, your exemption will be canceled. It's okay, you can go back in and reapply, but that's kind of a pain, right? You don't want to have to go through all that again. So if we receive, just to repeat, if we receive returned mail from the mailing address that we have for you, not really a fun process to go through. So note to self there, just if you're changing your mailing address, let us know. Email us or do so in TNTAP. Once the agricultural exemption certificate is reissued, so once we have issued it to you through our system, the older exemption certificate is no longer valid. Now, if you have a location change, there is a business location change, you will have to close your current location, open a new location. Now, going into details of that would take probably a whole nother webinar about that topic, but closing a location, opening a location, tons of information about it on our website. But here's the key thing I want you to understand here. You would then have to reapply for your ag exemption again, changing locations, not changing mailing addresses. That's a simple process. Just update us, let us know your new mailing address. Changing your business location, a little more complex there, and you will have to apply again for a new exemption under that new location. Or if you're just adding a location, let's say you've still got one location and you're not moving, you're just adding another business location to your sales tax account, to your tax accounts with the Tennessee Department of Revenue. Again, whole new ag exemption application process there. You cannot use your ag exemption for one location for another one. You need an ag exemption certificate for each location that you have. Any other changes that you have that you'll make to your business, you will need to reapply for another ag exemption, except that mailing address. That's a simple change. No need to reapply if you have a new mailing address. All right, ag exemption certificate. What documentation do you need to provide to a seller in order to get that exemption? You can provide a copy of the certificate that you're going to get once you're approved. We also send you a wallet-sized card. You can provide that. And the third item here, it's not very common at all, a fully completed streamlined sales tax certificate of exemption. Again, that's not usually the case. Usually you're going to have your either exemption certificate or your card. The seller, so who you're purchasing from and who you're going to provide this to, they need to keep a copy of these documents on file and include the buyer's name, address, and description of the tax exempt purchases for each invoice. The farmers, nursery operators, timber harvesters need to keep their original documents in a safe place for future use during the exemption period. Just want to make a note here because we did have a question about this, and we'll reiterate it again maybe during the Q&A part, because it was a pretty common question. A seller, a retailer that you shop with, if you hold this exemption, the seller does not by law have to honor your certificate. They can charge you sales tax. If that is the case, you might choose to shop in another location where someone will honor your ag exemption certificate. Right now is a time when probably a lot of sellers may be confused. We may have some sellers on here right now that are wanting some clarification about what you can actually not charge sales tax on, right? Probably a lot of people on this webinar today or that are viewing this that are in that boat. We're going to make it clear here in a minute to you, hopefully, what you can, what qualifies for this exemption. But when in doubt, if you are a seller or retailer, you are not obligated by law to honor an exemption certificate. Okay, now we're getting to why probably a lot of you are here right now. What is included on the agricultural exemption? What can you buy? What items can you buy without paying sales tax on? Here are just a few items, but not limited to these items, because you know what? Most items now, if they're used 50% of the time or more in agricultural operations, are exempt. So we'll talk in a minute about just a few things that aren't. Prior to this new law, most only things that were very specifically enumerated in our law were exempt. Only things specifically listed as exempt could you get this exemption for. Now it's pretty much anything, any tangible personal property, any TPP used in your operations, the majority of the time are exempt. That includes machinery, equipment, and other TPP used for producing farm or nursery products or harvesting timber. Big one here that I'm sure if you're in this industry, you're excited about: building and fencing materials. Big one there. Repair services and warranties, software, grain bins and attachments to grain bins, aircraft designed and used primarily for crop dusting, any trailers used to transport ag products, much, much more. A key here is that the items being purchased must be purchased by the holder of the exemption, by the entity that holds that ag exemption certificate. The item has to be purchased by them. So a good example to use here is contractors. If you are hiring a contractor to build your fence, to build something for you on your property that would otherwise qualify for this exemption, that contractor cannot purchase the items sales tax exempt. You can purchase them if you have the exemption, and then they can use them in the business of the work that you've hired them for, contracted them for. But the contractor cannot use your ag exemption to purchase the materials. The materials Any materials must be purchased by the holder of the exemption. Okay, we're going to dive a little deeper now into how you can qualify, what qualifies you for being able to purchase these things using your exemption certificate, these items, which again, pretty broad here, what qualifies, but agricultural qualifying items must be used primarily, which means 50% or more, in agricultural operations. How do we define agricultural operations? Our law is pretty clear about this. It's defined as land, buildings, and machinery used in the commercial production of farm products and nursery stock. We're going to define those in a minute. And activity carried on in connection with the commercial production of farm products and nursery stock. So what are farm products and nursery stock? Farm products in our law is defined as forage and sod crops, grains and feed crops, dairy and dairy products, poultry and poultry products, livestock, including breeding and grazing, fruits and vegetables, flowers, seeds, grasses, forestry products, fish and other aquatic animals used for food, bees, equine, and all other plants and animals that produce food, feed, fiber, or fur. The 4 F's there. So that's pretty specific, right? If you're wondering if a certain product, we know that most products, if you have the exemption, are exempt, but it has to meet this qualification first. Nursery stock is defined as trees, shrubs, and other plants or parts of such trees, shrubs, or plants grown or kept for or capable of propagation, distribution, or sale on a commercial basis. So you get your agricultural exemption certificate, you want to go buy an item of tangible personal property, which qualifies, most do. You have to run it through this gate first and make sure that what you're purchasing is going to be used in these ways. What does agricultural operations not mean? It does not mean recreational or educational activities on land used for the commercial production of farm products and nursery stock. So if you've got a farm and you also, let's say you do have commercial production of farm products and nursery stock, but you also have recreational and education activities, agricultural operations does not apply to that part of your business, the recreational or educational part. Entertainment activities conducted in conjunction with, but secondary to commercial production of farm products and nursery stock when such activities occur on land for the commercial production of farm products or nursery stock. So agritourism, if there's a farm that also does tours, corn maze tours, that kind of thing, that's what we're talking about here. So, if you produce a product commercially and also do this, any items that are going to be used for that entertainment or recreational part, those are not going to qualify for for being purchased using your ag exemption because they don't meet the definition of agricultural operations. Okay, so I was mentioning that this new law expands what does qualify. The old law very specifically listed what did qualify. Now, after this recent legislation, there's just a few things that the law specifically says do not qualify, some specific items of tangible personal property that do not qualify for the ag exemption. As has always been, automobiles and trucks do not qualify for the ag exemption, as well as repair, parts, and labor. Now, in our law, we do give the ag exemption for off-highway vehicles, side-by-sides, that type of thing. Again, as long as they meet the criteria of being used over 50% of the time in agricultural operations, they would qualify, but not automobiles and trucks. Household appliances do not qualify for the ag exemption. Gasoline or diesel used in vehicles operated upon public highways do not qualify. Lawnmowers designed for residential use that are used 50% more of the time for non-agricultural purposes. That's specifically listed here, but that kind of goes without saying because it's used for over 50% of the time for your personal use, right? General clothing items such as coveralls, overalls, and boots, any clothing items, even though those are items of tangible personal property, and even if you are using them on the farm, they are specifically listed in our law as not qualifying for this exemption. All right, well, we've covered all the basics at this point. Just want to point you towards a few places. If you've attended our webinars before, you're probably used to seeing this slide here, but just want to reiterate the resources that we have. We have great resources on our website. We use them internally all the time because they're just really, really, really great. All of our tax manuals, as I mentioned earlier, there's an F&E manual, a business tax manual, a sales tax manual, a specific agricultural exemptions manual. Those are going to be found on our website. You go to tn.gov/revenue and then click on tax resources. As always, you can file, pay, etc. on TINTAP. You can find that on the TINTAP tile from our homepage. Help articles, lots of great help articles. You click on revenue help from our homepage and there's a search button there where you can type in any term, and we have hundreds and hundreds of help articles that kind of want to find an answer to something quick or see if you can and don't want to dive through the manuals. Great resource there for you. And general tax info by clicking on the taxes tile on our from our homepage. All right, I'm going to just land and stay on this slide for a little while we start our discussion. Let me go in and open up our chat for you guys. When you go into chat, make sure you send your message to all panelists. Billy and Martha, if y'all want to come on back in here with me, let me make this change here. We've gotten lots of questions from you actually on your registration forms. So
Yes,
we'll
we
get
sure
started
have.
with the frequently asked questions here.
Okay, well, thank you, Katie. Great job going through a lot of
Yes.
information there. And there's a lot to discuss on that. Just to kind of reiterate what Katie was saying there, even towards the end of her presentation, there's not a lot of change to the whole idea of the agricultural exemption. What the new law passed last year does is it sort of expands what's available to our qualified farmers and nursery operators and timber harvesters. So Martha is online with us here too to discuss a couple of things here too, Martha. So let's just go ahead and talk about this real quick. Martha, you see these applications that come in from our folks that want the exemption. Can you kind of tell us a few things that you see that probably need to be addressed, that, maybe stuff that people miss a lot? Would you go ahead and talk about that?
Sure. And great job, by the way, Katie. You did a wonderful job on that. Um, yeah, a lot of the main things that we see on the applications that are missing are proofs of farming. They don't provide us any type of proof of farming, or if they're providing us farming, it's not the right type of proofs, especially with the farm management plans, which is the letter that's written to the commissioner, basically telling us why you're able to qualify for the agricultural exemption. A lot of things that are missed always are the projected date of first sale as well as the projected income. We send a lot of those applications back requesting this information from the taxpayers. So, just be sure that if the letter or the farm management plan is what you're going to submit to the department, just make sure those 5 questions are answered. They are on the instructions of the application. So just make sure that you're answering those questions. It does not have to be anything very elaborate. We don't need 20 pages of what you're going to do on the farm. If you have it and want to send it, great. If not, if I've seen it to where these 5 questions are answered and that's all that we get. And as long as we've got enough information on that farm management plan, then we do go ahead and usually process them as long as they qualify. Signatures, we've not had a whole lot of those, but we do have from time to time. Just make sure that you sign the application. If it's a marital joint application, make sure that you're providing both spouses' names, both spouses' social security numbers. We send that back a lot as well. if you live in Tennessee, we do have a way of being able to tell whose social belongs to who, but there are times if it's an out-of-state application or you don't have a Tennessee license or something, we can't find you, so we do send that information back. And if you select marital joint and only one person is entered, we're going to send it back requesting the spouse's information as well. I know there's not really a place on the application to enter the spouse's information, so just somewhere on the application, right beside, where you put your social or social really, or down where you select the type of ownership, you can write the spouse's name there and enter their social beside that. So those are just some of the main things. Also with partnerships, kind of always remember we do require a partnership name. It can't be an individual name, and we require a federal ID number for partnerships. The proof of farming also has to be in whoever's name is on line 1. So whoever the entity is that's applying, we've got to have that proof of farming in that person or that entity's name.
That's really important, Martha, because
Yes.
you know, you guys spend a lot of time going through this, and of course, as the law by our Tennessee legislature is dictating, it's giving our qualified farmers, et cetera, the opportunity for this exemption. But it's important to know that we're required to dot I's and cross T's on these applications. So
Exactly.
it is a pretty significant exemption,
It is. It is.
and on the back side of that, so once you have that exemption certificate or the little card that's at the bottom of the certificate, and you
Right.
go to that supplier, you've got to pay for your purchase with the funds that are from the same entity where the card is registered. So, in other words,
Right.
it's super important that if you are going to apply with Martha and crew for a exemption for, let's say, your LLC, that when you go to the supply store to get your supplies, that you're paying with funds, credit card, debit card, check, whatever, from the LLC, or from
Right.
whatever entity that you have. So it's got to match up. All right. If not, then the vendor may refuse and probably should actually refuse your exemption. Okay.
Right.
So just be sure you're applying the way that you need to. Make sure everything matches up. Okay.
Right.
I saw a question here, y'all, about
Mhm.
can a spouse use the exemption if they're using the card that's associated, the payment method that's associated with the taxpayer? Would they
Mhm.
that they still can't purchase it? The spouse cannot. It has to be the actual exemption holder that's making the purchase, right?
Yes, there are a lot of times that when we do print off the exemption authorization certificate, if they choose to put some type of DBA, like you're calling your farm something, that's going to be on the on the actual certificate. So, it is kind of harder for vendors to be able to say, okay, you're the spouse, we can use this. So if they're set up as a sole proprietor in our system, and then if a retailer wants to contact the department and just, have this verified, then we can verify. We can't obviously give out information, but if it's a marital joint and we only have one of the spouse's names on it, and they get questioned or something, that retailer can always reach out to our department and we can verify that, okay, this is a marital joint, it is fine.
Hmm.
But if it's
Also,
set up as a sole proprietor, it needs to be just the sole proprietor that the entity or the exemption's under.
hmm, yeah, and one other thing that was worth mentioning too, we get this question every once in a while. So, if you have a large farming operation or whatever, and you may have one of your folks that works in your operation go down to the supply store and get bags of feed, hay, whatever, and and it may be that they're bringing a copy of that exemption certificate for the farm and still paying with the proper account from the farm, it's okay that you have a third party submit that information. That's okay, because this person is just acting on behalf of the owner. That's okay. We're not telling you you have to be the person in person all the time, but everything else needs to match up. You can have a third party submit it for you. That's all right.
Right. And I do want to say, and Katie, I apologize, I didn't get this over to you because I just now thought about it. But always with the agricultural exemption, we only issue one exemption per entity. So if a person or an entity owns more than one property, they only have to submit an application for one of the properties that they choose and, provide us the proof for that property, then we're only going to issue the one exemption, and that entity is able to use that exemption for any of their other properties that they have. This type of exemption is an entity-based and not location-based. So you do get a location on the certificate, but we're not going to issue you a agricultural exemption for each property that you have.
Thank you for clarifying that, because there
Yes,
was a
I thought
slide
about
where I
that.
was talking about that. But again, if that location that you have registered, if that changes in any way, that's when you would still
Yes.
have to re-up. Okay, got it. Thank
Yes,
you for clarifying
absolutely.
that.
Yes, yes.
So I want to talk about, if you guys don't mind, this whole thing about building materials again, and Katie did an excellent job of explaining it during the presentation. So, for years and years, actually going back in time, oh my goodness, to like 2007, when the agricultural exemption changed dramatically back at that point. We've even before that, we were just so adamant that a farmer or a nursery person cannot never get building materials tax exempt. It's not allowed. Okay. So with this new change, there's quite a bit of change to this whole process now. You can get things like T-posts and sheet metal and lumber and things like that if you're a qualified farmer, nursery operator, or timber harvester. Okay. But like Katie mentioned very carefully, is that you cannot transfer that exemption over to a contractor and have that contractor buy that material and install that material. It's got to be you buying that material for the use in your operation. Again, an actual for use in your operation, and then it would qualify to do that. So, in other words, the legislature expanded this quite a bit, but what you have to do is you have to be very careful about what you're using this exemption for, because if you are audited in some way, you've got to be able to prove that you are able to say that this is for agricultural purposes. Okay. If that's the case, you're good, no problem. But just be very careful with this expanded sort of thing. And Katie mentioned, lots of different applications that you can use this in, all kinds of different things, things that you might be, not even thinking about right now that you might be using to construct for your operations. And it's okay, you know. So I wanted to make sure that we understood all that, because we're getting quite a few questions about the building material. And also to reiterate one other thing about the suppliers, we very much encourage all of the retailers to accept any valid exemption certificate, any of them whatsoever. Okay. But we can't force them to do it. We would encourage you to tell them, hey, go to Department of Revenue's website, check it out, whatever. But then ultimately, as the consumer, you can sort of vote with your feet, and you can move on to another retailer that's willing to work with you, as far as that goes too. But, we are very cognizant of the fact that certain people don't accept certificates, and that's too bad. We really want them to do that. We spend a lot of time educating different groups and putting out these important notices like we have on this particular topic too. So it's super important that the retailers kind of meet you. And again, it's really no dollars out of their pocket. So we kind of hope that they'll adopt that approach. What else should we be talking about there, ladies? What do you think about?
Well, I'm just kind of going through some of the questions, and there was a question from Jim Webb. He said, when I initially bought the farm and applied for the exemption, my business plan was to grow and sell hay. I'm changing to a cattle operation now. Do I have to reapply? You do not have to reapply. As long as you're still qualifying as an agricultural um, entity, then you can keep the same exemption certificate that you have, and no, you do not need to reapply. So the only time you really have to reapply is if like your location is changing, or the structure of your businesses or the entity is changing, like you're going from a sole proprietor and you're becoming an LLC, or vice versa, or something like that. That would be the only real reason why you would need to have to reapply. But if you're just changing from where you're selling hay to now you're doing cattle, you still would qualify, as long as you're qualifying under the law, and everything is still over the 1500, or you're in green belt or something like that.
Mhm.
So no, you do not have to reapply.
Yeah, I saw another one here from Jimmy also, was talking about the Greenbelt program. And if you maybe purchased a side by side or an ATV or something like that, and you just qualified under the Greenbelt program, would that still qualify? The answer is yes, it would. But again, we go back to this whole idea about it being an agricultural operation. Now, what's weird about that is that Greenbelt law says, hey, your property is in the Greenbelt and you cannot use it for any sort of development. So it just sort of sits there. Okay. But our law says that if you have that land, you qualify, and Martha and her crew will approve the exemption. So as long as you're buying something that's allowing you to preserve that land or whatever in such a particular way, maybe fencing, maybe some kind of erosion control, maybe you use the ATV to go out and look at different things on the land or whatever. I mean, this is sort of a thing that no one person can say, hey, this is a bright line test and it's always going to qualify that type of equipment. But it could do that. And the fact that you've got that greenbelt exemption is an easy approval process for folks in Martha's unit, because that's a qualifier. It just is. As long as you're submitting all that. And just one more time to kind of reiterate what Katie said earlier, scanning the application form and the documentation, all the documentation, and sending it in to us to our email address is the super easiest way to get things done. Okay. So when Martha and her team receive that information, they can pull that PDF down from the email, look at all that, make sure everything is nice and clean, and you can go ahead and issue your exemption certificate based on that information. So mailing, yeah, sure, we take things by mail all day long, but not the most efficient way to send it in, I don't think. So anyway, just my opinion. How about that?
Yes. And just kind of to reiterate, you do not have to submit another application just because it's a renewal year. If nothing has changed with your location address, with your structure of your entity, meaning you've changed from a sole proprietor to a marital joint or vice versa, do not send in those applications, because there's not anything that we're going to do other than just reprint the existing certificate. These certificates are automatically going to be renewed. I would not contact the department until, I would say, the first week or two of January, if you have not received your new exemption certificate for 2024. So those renewal certificates should go out. I would say, I'm saying, I don't know when, but probably the end of November, sometime in December. So, be watching your mail, or I'm going to say those are going to be on the 10-tap site. I'm not sure to where you're able to print those off as well. So if you already have an exemption, then you do not need to reapply with us or submit another application.
Yeah,
Lots
that's a
of
good
questions
point.
in here, y'all, about just asking questions about our specific items, uh, exempt. Really, I think the best slide we've got to explain this is if you have the exemption, step one, qualify for the exemption, hold that certificate, right? But then run it past, most items, as long as they are being used in this capacity right here. This is kind of a key slide. If you're using it in this way, over 50% of the time in ag operations, some details here about what is considered ag operations in terms of definitions of farm products, et cetera. But everything except these just very few things that are listed as not exempt, right?
And the first thing on the top of that list, Katie, is the one we get the most often.
Right.
If it is a motor vehicle, if it is a car, if it is a truck, it doesn't qualify. Okay. That's just plain and simple. That's a bright line. It's in our notices. It's in that agricultural manual that you pointed out. That's tremendous and all that too. And of course, one other thing on here I always laugh about is the lawnmowers. Okay. So
Yeah.
I don't know that any of you are keeping a log for the number of hours used for residential mowing versus nursery mowing or something like that. But honestly, everybody shouldn't probably go out and buy a lawnmower that they're going to be using around their house and that sort of thing too. Any more so than, let's say, I decide to grow tomatoes and corn in my backyard and I'm a farmer. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. Martha's going to deny me. She's going to say, nope, get out of here. Not a thing, you know? So, it's different. And people do try different things. If our audit division finds out that there's fraud or abuse, of course, they're going to make an assessment. And we don't want that to happen to you. We want to approve all of the qualified folks, obviously, and let you buy the items that the law allows you to buy tax-free and sales tax. Okay. All right. Do we have anything else we want to talk about real quick? I would like to also say we have hundreds of people on here with us, and we're glad that all of you have attended. We know we're not going to touch every one of your questions here, but Katie at the very end is going to show you how you can email us, and we will answer your question. How about that? We were pretty good about that. Bragging on my team that answers emails. We're busy all the time, but we're always glad to help you, and we want to give you the opportunity to do that too. One final thing I'll say, and then I'll be quiet, is this entire idea of the tax manuals. Katie mentioned that. Katie, have you got just a quick second to splash out there and show them how to get to that manual? She's going to
Sure.
show you right now. As she does that, she's going to go under tax resources there. And she's going to click in the left column there for tax manuals. And then if you look at this, you'll find the agricultural manual right there too. Also, one other cool thing that they just put out there here recently is a heading in the manual section that's about, hey, here's some pending updates to the manual that's going to be in the next version. And here's different things that have changed recently and stuff like that. This is phenomenal. This is something that people like Martha and Katie and I love because we use this stuff all day long, and it's there for you too. If you're a CPA, an accountant, a farmer, and Department of Revenue worker, we're all working out of the same book, folks. This is wonderful, and it is deep and intense. It's got lots of stuff. So, Katie, thank you for showing all that. I appreciate that a bunch. I'll be quiet and let Katie and Martha say anything else that they want to say. Go ahead, ladies.
Well, like you said, we've still got, we're out of time, but still have a lot of questions there. Again, send us an email to revenue.support@tn.gov. There is a lot of, this is a big change. So
Yes.
it's a good change, and we are so thankful in this state for our farmers. It
Mhm.
is who we are as Tennesseans, right? And I think our legislature, this law reflects that and really opens things up for you as farmers to be able to save yourself a little bit of tax dollars. There's a little bit more money in your pocket if you're doing this important work for us. So we appreciate all of you that have been with us here today. Thanks, Billy, Dan for man in chat, and Martha especially for your expertise with putting all this information together for us. There is a quick survey as you exit today's webinar. If you wouldn't mind filling that out for us, let us know what you thought of this webinar. And also if you've got any ideas for future webinars, we would love to get your input there. And again, if you want CPE credit, if you requested that when you registered, we'll send those out here in the next week or so. And a video of today's presentation will be posted by tomorrow, maybe later today, but probably more likely tomorrow.
Also, if you need CPE credit and you did not request it on registration, just look at the information on our website about how to make that request, and we'll work with you that way as well. Okay?
Next month's free tax webinar, it's always on the last Tuesday of the month. Next month, we'll be discussing motor fuel taxes, and that'll be on February 28th. So we will see you then or soon, and have a great rest of your day. If you're here in Tennessee, it's going to be a wet or icy one, but enjoy it, and thanks to you all.
Thanks,
Yes.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.